Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, who runs a company in Tokyo that focuses exclusively on Japanese politics, government and public affairs, and host Paya Matsuoka, bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. So without any further delay, let's start.
Gosh, you're pushing so quickly. I missed, I guess we both signed up a little bit late because I always look forward to getting together and talking with you just a little bit beforehand. But now it's just all business, so get to work, Mr. Langley.
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The Diet started this week on Tuesday for their 150-day session. And we talked a little bit about it last week. This is our 50th week talking about Japanese politics consecutively, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, 51 weeks under the watchful eye of Maya, so that we get a good crisp briefing and it's tightly monitored for 51 weeks. That's really something. So I appreciate that, and we've said that before. How much we appreciate people tuning in. Politically, there's not a whole lot to report on what's going on in Japanese politics, but always there's things going on that are interesting and indicative of what's going to be happening in a very short order. So we've got the upper house elections coming in July, and so a lot is geared towards that. In fact, even this current session of the Diet will be not manipulated, but revised and adjusted on an ongoing basis because of that election. So the LDP is sitting in a relatively strong position. It wants to enhance that position, and then it wants to push forward constitutional revision. And the reason why constitutional revision is such a hot button is because, oh my God, I mean, just look at Japan's situation. The prime minister he spoke at Davos virtually. He spoke with the president of the United States on Friday. They had an 80-minute phone call. And defense and security are primary on the topics. And in order to get to, military security and defensive capabilities, it does require a different way of approaching it. You've got North Korea, which fired, four missiles just since the beginning of this year. Today is what, the 23rd? So that's a pretty hefty pace. So it does impact a lot of things. I've got like 5 different topics I want to address with you tonight. I've got COVID, which is high on the list. I'm going to talk a little bit about North Korea. I'm going to talk about Tonga, the Beijing Olympics, very briefly. And then I'm going to focus the rest of my conversation on Mr. Kishida and the challenges that he faces in front of him. So with regard to COVID, it really is the measuring stick for Mr. Suga, and it will be for Mr. Kishida too. Mr. Kishida prefers to talk a little bit more about those areas where he's more familiar and more famously secured, which is foreign policy, since he was the foreign minister for so long. But COVID and the booster shots and how many children are being inoculated, that sort of thing, are hot buttons now. So as you might know, Pfizer shots for children was just approved on Thursday, and those will be rolling out probably in February. There's a little bit of problem with access and inventory, but they've already decided that up until now, children 12 years and older were receiving some form of vaccine. But moving on from February, they're going to be inoculating children from 5 to 12. So this is a pretty big deal. It's been done in other countries. They've had a very successful rollout elsewhere, but this is the first for Japan. And even with regard to just the children, I mean, as you know, there are only 7.2, well, you might not know, but there are only 7.2 million children within the ages of 5 to 12. So it's not a huge amount. It's 6% of the total population. And they want to make sure that these children are inoculated. And the reason is because in the Omicron variant, the children are becoming infected, not getting terribly sick. Nobody in Japan has died. No children has died from COVID or from the Omicron variant, but they are transferring it to family and friends. So families as a core group become infected, and then it begins to roll out. and infect other people in the population. So for Japan, totally, there's been 18,000 deaths so far by COVID, but just in the last week, it's been 30,000 cases of Omicron. So Omicron is growing really strongly. In the last week, 5,000 plus for Tokyo and Osaka. Comparatively for the United States, 5,000 for Tokyo, 5,000 plus for Osaka, maybe 30,000 cases this last week. In the United States, that compares to 7,000, almost 800,000 COVID infections. So it's really, really a huge issue for him. And, the country needs to focus on it, and the prime minister needs to focus on it. So most prefectures now, there's about 13 of them that are asking for the government to grant them quasi-emergency status. It's not a lockdown, it's not a state of emergency, but it's something prior to that. It gives governors the ability to somewhat control movements and opening and closing businesses. Mostly this is focused on restaurants and hotels. So serving alcohol in particular. So Tokyo is going under it. If you go out, you've probably noticed it already that in Tokyo, you go out, there are so few people on the streets. It's like what happened when the fourth wave hit and people just stayed inside. It's starting to look like that. You can go out and eat in some restaurants. You can have alcohol served. And the government provides a stipend to these companies that accommodate the new rules. So if you're a restaurant that is serving alcohol and food and you stay open till midnight, for example, and you're closing up because of the restrictions, you do get a certain stipend for that. And if you stop serving alcohol at 8 o'clock, you get more than somebody who continues to serve at 9 o'clock. So it's somewhat flexible, but the governors want to be able to monitor that and control that. So you'll be seeing more and more of this rolling out. This is just happening pretty live. They had a decision of it. They talked about it Tuesday, Wednesday, and I think they decided on it and announced it on Friday. So Tokyo will be going under that as well. Moving on, we can talk more about that if you want to and get to greater detail, but I'd like to move on. North Korea, like I said earlier, fired its fourth missile. So since the beginning of the year, they've fired four. Two of them were hypersonic. One was a rail-based one, so using some new technique, new technology perhaps. But it does look like there's more saber rattling going on. This has come out of the Kim Jong-un's demand for greater concessions, as he has voluntarily withheld further launches and nuclear testing. And since the concessions were not greeted with much, fanfare or acceptance, he got mad and decided to get into this new ploy. This could be as a consequence of the Biden administration and their foreign policy and some of the decisions that they're making with regard to the U.S. stance here in Japan and with regard to China. So it's a more likely than not an integrated approach by the North Koreans, and it is heightening tensions because they're not really generating the kind of response that they had expected. So what this does for Mr. Kishida is it enhances his position on having strike capabilities, which are offensive, obviously, in nature, not defensive. And in his conversation with President Biden, he had a conversation on Friday. This topic came up too about having strike capabilities and preeminent strike on offensive from enemies, offensive capabilities that are potentially geared towards Japan. So under the current constitution, this is not allowed. So once again, Mr. Kishida has some tough decisions to make. We've talked about how the Constitution is revised. It requires 2/3 vote in the upper house, 2/3 vote in the lower house, and then a referendum. They changed the referendum law, or they enhanced the referendum law at the end of the Abe administration as a precursor to having this revision of the Constitution. So this march forward in having this revision of the Constitution is a huge deal. It's been one of the primary tenets of the LDP to revise the Constitution. So it looks like, no matter what happens, it's more likely that will come to pass. And the critical test is during the upper house election, not 7 months away. When we spoke last Sunday, we had just received the impacts of the Tonga explosion, the underwater volcanic explosion. And in Okinawa and in southern Japan, they did receive some damage due to a tsunami that did not exceed 1 meter. But in some fishing ports, just even 1 meter is pretty drastic because of the topography. In Japan, in Tokyo, I have lots of friends who are on the water, who are, living very close to the water or on boats. And although there was some rise and a rocking of the boats, there was no damage here. But it sure did do damage in faraway places like in Hawaii and Peru. It hit Alaska. So it was pretty unbelievable. I'm sure you've seen the photos from outer space on the explosion. The policy implications here are that, Tonga is an independent nation, and Japan is sending aid to them. They finally put it together, and you can't criticize them too much. It happened on Saturday night here in Tokyo. The waves hit us on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. They finally got, their act together to respond to that, compile what aid they're going to put together, and then started the shipment. So on Thursday, they did send two planes full of aid to Tonga. They've earmarked about $1 million for aid preliminarily. And then the Japan Foundation and some of the other NPOs are pulling together funds, actually almost matching what the Japanese government is providing in dollar aid. So there is contributions going on there. The Japanese self-defense forces are known for disaster prevention and rescue operations. They send teams whenever there's an earthquake in other areas of the world. And this is their 24th time to participate in an international disaster. So they're building something of a reputation. And I think it's not Japan's fault that it's taken, 5 days for them to get there. I think that's pretty remarkable. There's more to come out of that as the news of how bad the damage was, but the Japanese are sending lots of heavy earth-moving equipment for removing ash and clearing roads and that sort of thing, and of course, water tents and that sort of thing. The Beijing Olympics, as you know, starts in 12 days. What a big deal that is. It is coming at a time when China, too, is being hit by the Omicron variant. And their policy, unlike the policy of England, you saw Boris Johnson announce in Parliament, no more masks, no more mandates, no more COVID restrictions. We're going to embrace the fact that COVID is here and we need to learn to live with it, but we need to get on with our lives. Many states in the United States are also pursuing that same policy. China is somewhat different. China doesn't tolerate COVID infections because of the crowded living conditions and the ability to spread so quickly. So their policy is zero tolerance. So they do have city lockdowns. They're not allowing any foreign spectators into China for the Olympics, and they're going to be cracking down on the Olympians that come in any event. So there will be a high degree of surveillance and people just making sure that these foreigners don't bring in COVID. And by the way, Tonga, just getting back to Tonga has zero COVID. I think they've only had one reported case of COVID. And one of the fears is that now that they've had this disaster, and even with the self-defense forces coming in on several plane loads, and then they're sending a relief ship with the heavy equipment, that the foreigners, the Japanese self-defense forces personnel, could be bringing COVID into the islands, and so there's a great fear there. So what they're doing with the relief aid and the packages that they're delivering is this will be contactless. So the Tonganese will be there at the airport to receive the goods, but the goods will be, I guess, the pallets will be unloaded, and the airplanes will just take off again. But it's very interesting that Tonga just has no COVID reportage. Moving on to Mr. Kishida's, he doesn't have a tenuous situation, but he has a difficult road in front of him. He's got to somehow coalesce the LDP, the various factions, and come on strong and respond to all of the issues with regard to the economy, with defense, with COVID response. There are a lot of issues, not just the social issues. but he's also struggling to keep his LDP together. He's got, as you know, there are 7 factions, and Mr. Kishida is pretty much coalesced 3 of the large ones, and then the largest one, the Abe faction, sits out a little bit alone. It's not included in a lot of the internal policy decisions. So there's a little bit of tension there, and you'll notice that Mr. Abe will be he has been frequently talking publicly about his view on foreign policy, and Mr. Kishida is trying to craft his own foreign policy, which is quite a bit different. Not quite a bit different, but he made a foreign policy speech on Thursday, by the way, and he talked about what his foreign policy will be, and it's an important speech because it gives you lots of guidance on how he sees the region and the world and what his intentions are with regard to that. And I think the reason why he emphasized that is because it's his strong suit. He wants to lead with his best foot forward. It does generate a little bit of opposition from people who either don't like him or don't like the LDP, even people in the LDP who just don't want his coalition to be that successful. But he's promoted his stance on China, Russia, North Korea, South Korea, the big ones. Not so much on the United States. That's pretty much status quo. But he described his foreign policy as firmly holding up the banner of ideals for the future while facing the reality, which is becoming increasingly severe and complex. I don't know what that really means. Firmly holding up the banner of ideals for the future while facing the reality, which is becoming increasingly severe and complex. I'm quoting from his speech. So that really doesn't say a whole lot. You can kind of use it as a comparison. What earlier prime ministers said at their foreign policy pronouncements, and in a kind of comparison. And I think that's useful because it does show a little bit of a contrast. So, for example, Prime Minister Noda in 2012 said that he wanted to advance what he called the Asia Pacific century. You probably remember that. And he upgraded even the shift from the United States, saying that the center of gravity has moved from the United States and Europe towards the Pacific century. So this was echoed by Mr. Noda. And Mr. Abe just took it one more step up and said he wanted to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific. And similarly with the U.S.-Japan alliance, Noda said that the alliance is a common resource essential for the stability and prosperity of the Asia-Pacific region and the world. And Kishida is also pursuing that. So no change on that. The U.S.-Japan alliance is strong, even though we have problems with the status of forces and the fact that the U.S. military, obviously brought in a lot of COVID because they weren't testing and they weren't being very vigilant on soldiers coming into particularly Okinawa, but there are other areas where they have U.S. bases. And the other complication is that even under the status of forces agreement between Japan and the United States, there are certain obligations. There are certain things that the U.S. military does not need to abide by. So these pronouncements of being inoculated and getting your health tests and 72 hours, these sort of things, they apply to that area which the Japanese immigration and the foreign ministry control. And SDF has a carve out there. So I'm sorry, the status of forces has a carve out there. So there is a little bit of discussion about a revision of the status of forces agreement, which has been in place since the 1960s. But anyway, that's U.S. Japan, and that's touching on some of the delicacy there and some of the tension. With regard to China, Abe's position that he wanted to strengthen a stable relationship from a broad perspective while deepening dialogues at various levels. That makes a little bit of sense. Mr. Suga said that while there are outstanding issues of concern between our two countries, Japan will continue to firmly maintain its position on necessary and on occasions of high-level contacts and strongly urge China to take concrete action. So it's a little bit, the tension you can see is increasing. This is over a period of 3 years. And then Kishida, in his policy statement, said, "We will say what needs to be said to China and strongly demand responsible acts. And at the same time, we will have dialogue and cooperate on issues where we have shared concerns." So you can see that there's a little bit of weakness there in terms of engagement. China has always reacted very strongly when it feels like it's been singled out unfairly, or when people talk about some of its policies that they don't agree with. It lashes out pretty strongly. And Mr. Kishida says, well, we're going to say what needs to be said. and we're going to demand responsible acts. So you can see that there's a ratcheting up there. So he also mentioned that the possibility of, the Senkaku Islands and Taiwan, that he would improve island defense capabilities to enhance preparedness for the Southwest Islands, and we will amend the Self-Defense Forces Law to take all possible measures for the transportation of Japanese nationals in case they're in danger overseas. So that's pretty aggressive if you compare it to Noda, Abe, and Suga's position. And you can see that this, as I said earlier, this need or this desire to have offensive capabilities just is growing and growing. What he said right here is mostly just on defensive capabilities, but there is a suggestion that, especially with regard to his conversation with President Biden on Friday, indicates that, more needs to be done. With Russia, we still don't have a peace treaty with Russia. And Abe said, we'll tenaciously continue negotiations with Russia towards concluding the peace treaty while deepening our cooperation in fields of science, economy, and culture. And Suga said pretty much the same thing and said the exchanges at the summit meeting in Singapore in 2018 have been carried out through my administration. I will continue to advance negotiations. But here's a little bit of a difference with Mr. Kishida, what he said on Thursday. He said, we will develop the entire Japan-Russia relationship while persistently pursuing negotiations based on the various agreements reached to date, including the exchanges at the summit meeting in Singapore 2018 and the continuing of exchanges between the leaders since 2018. So it's pretty much status quo, not so much emphasis on Russia. I think they're still smarting a little bit from that flotilla, that naval flotilla between China and Russia that went through the Tsukuda Straits in the late fall. So there is some tension there. And with regard to North Korea, I think the policy pretty much remains the same. He said he would formulate a new national security strategy and that he will realistically consider all options, including the so-called enemy base attack capability. This is what he said in the diet. But he also said that his administration will drastically strengthen the nation's defense capabilities with a sense of speed. So you can see that he intends to not only enhance the defense capabilities, probably in line with the United States umbrella that they enjoy, but also having more offensive capabilities. And since they don't have the technology for that, or haven't in the past developed that technology, they do have some dual technology. It probably means that there's more cooperation to be had between the United States and Japan, which enhances the importance of what the president and the prime minister talked about on Friday night. And with South Korea, it's kind of same-o. It was said with Prime Minister Noda in 2012 that our most important neighboring country is the Republic of Korea, and Suga kind of was a little bit less enthusiastic about it. He called South Korea an important neighboring country, which is different from our most important neighboring country. And so this year, Mr. Kishida mentioned South Korea in only one sentence, saying, we will strongly urge South Korea, an important neighbor, to take appropriate measures based on Japan's consistent position. So you can see that this is taking a little bit of a different tone. It's something important to watch. But I think overall, the Japanese public, in getting towards the upper house election, is going to be more concerned with COVID and the economy. And we've said earlier that Mr. Kishida is geared towards forming a new form of capitalism. He talked about that. He spoke at Davos. He had a video conference participation at Davos on Thursday. He's been pretty busy. Davos on Thursday, the President of the United States on Friday, his diet session and policy speeches on Tuesday. So it's not quite accurate to say in politics, not a whole lot has been going on. There's always something going on. But with regard to flashpoints, it hasn't been a windfall of reporting on internal fights. One of the things that we need to watch out for going forward is there will be huge sensitivity to scandals in the parliament, because the opposition will really pick up on that and hammer the LDP and hammer the prime minister. So you can expect, and there's always scandals. It's a component of Japanese politics, because many of the people who are running the ministries are they're ministers. They're not specialists in those particular fields, and they go from being a member of parliament to a minister. It's a huge leap, and sometimes people just get get caught up in it, and sometimes they continue to lead their lives as they were leading them as a quote unquote a normal parliamentarian member of the parliament. But when you're when you're the minister and you have cars assigned to you, security, and lots of bureaucrats giving you briefing papers and telling you what to say and how to act, it's easy to create enemies on policy decisions that are made. And not only that, but for the opposition, it benefits them to find the weak links in the cabinet and the prime minister's decision making. So currently, the prime minister holds a positive on public appreciation for his policies, although he's only been in office for 5 months or so. He stands at about 57 approval rate, which is not great, but it's okay. People aren't hating him; they're not throwing stones at him. But that could change very quickly, and he can't let that happen. There's only 6 months left for the upper house election, so you will notice when these scandals come up, keep your eye out. They will come up. Bunchen is dedicated to sniffing these things out and being pretty successful at it. So you can anticipate those coming. Golden Week is coming up. There is a push now for preparation for the school test that's going on for elementary school to get into high school to get into college. And that's one of the reasons why COVID testing for children is a hot button now. But in Golden Week, it's maybe a 10-day period this year when practically businesses shut down and everybody takes a vacation. Typically, people travel then, and if the COVID is not under control at that time, it's only 2 months away before the upper house election. So that will be a barometer for how well Mr. Kishida is handling COVID. And I think the COVID response and what his ideas are of new capitalism, how he's going to distribute the wealth so that more of the middle class receive it and the companies are forced to pay higher wages, which is also Shunto, the labor offensive, which starts in the spring. All of these things will conspire to put Mr. Kishida in a very difficult position. And we're going to continue to watch it and report to you on it because it's just interesting as hell. So with that, I'd like to close it up, Maya, open it up for questions, but not from you, from other people, and see what other heat and light we can generate.
Yes, thank you. Well, the floor is open to comments, questions, and also opinions. Well, Timothy, you said that Mr. Kishida, he had a policy speech last week, but we have seen very little in the news about any concrete policies he really wants to, except for diplomacy, of course. You talked about diplomacy and
Yeah.
we can see that, but there are so many other issues here in Japan, and the people who live in the country who, I mean, they can be, of course, they're Japanese or foreign residents. I think they're more interested in concrete policies about
Yeah.
the economy and also the pandemic. So,
Mm-hmm.
but is there any news at all about it? Even
Actually, we're going to talk about that on, is that Tuesday or that's on Wednesday, isn't it, Maya?
it's
We've got
Tuesday, the
on
22nd.
Tuesday.
Yes.
So you've got a room set up. It's a live room. It's going to be on LinkedIn, but I'm joining Dr. Stephen Nagy on talking specifically about that issue, on what are the policy rollouts that we can anticipate for this year. That's different from what your question is. Your question is, what policy issues are they discussing now and what can we anticipate them rolling out?
Exactly.
What we're going to be talking about on Tuesday is what policy decisions did they make last year that are rolling out now? What can we anticipate seeing? So that'll be a little bit more, real time. But it is true that it is a lot of policy talk. He wants to talk about, diminishing the carbon footprint and preparing for, the 2050, 2040 carbon neutrality. They have no carbon tax here in Japan yet. They're one of the laggards in that. They need to do something there. He wants to create, digitization throughout the country. So it's a lot of talk there. The digital agency was established, this time last year, I guess. That was a big success, but it just takes time for those policies to trickle out. And the goals there were mostly with regard to diminishing the use of hanko and fax machines and enhancing the proliferation of the my number system. And I think they've made strides there. But they're, like you said, there are bigger issues that are more impactful. I think it just takes time. It's like with the COVID response. It just takes them a long time to get the wind in their sails until they finally start implementing policies that they've decided on. And I think that's what we're confronting here too. So I think with regard to where his energy is going to be. Definitely, it's going to be on digitization. Definitely, it's going to be on carbon neutrality. So that means with the renewable energies, and defense and revision of the Constitution is not going to be high on the public's list because, like you said, the food and job issues are much more meaningful. But in Davos, he also stated that was his intention with moving forward there. He's going to push for a green and digital transformation as part of his efforts to create a new form of capitalism. So he's really geared to that. He said he wants to lead the global trend with the new form of capitalism, and he wants to demonstrate concrete examples of how capitalism can evolve. And in light of this, Japan will assume the presidency of the Group of Seven next year. So that's a pretty big deal too. He wants to be prime minister while that happens.
Yes, but all of these things, they are just
blah blah blah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's talk. So he's trying to create the expectations of how his administration will be different from Mr. Abe's. He's struggling hard to do that. And I think one of the reasons why we haven't heard anything is because even articulated in his public policy speech and his comments in the Diet, describing what this new form of capitalism is difficult for him in that area, and he is the creator of it. So when you take it just one step removed into the various ministries who are supposed to come up with ideas of how to do that and how to force companies to pay higher wages and how to distribute the wealth a little bit more, I'm not sure what's the right word, appropriately, according to him. That takes months and months of bureaucratic time to kind of figure that out and see how the law needs to be changed. I think that's the problem that he's suffering from.
There are so many issues when you start even with how they handle the pandemic. So the country remains closed, and
they're getting lots of heat for that. Even
yeah,
the foreign educators. I think there was something that came out from, what was it? Maybe Stephen Vogel, who is Ezra Vogel's son, wrote a letter that was signed by maybe almost 2,000 educators about Japan opening its doors to students and international teachers, that sort of thing, because they are just suffering from that. Without the ability to come into Japan, people's careers are actually not even put on hold; they're actually destroyed.
They are indeed. Hopefully, they'll just get themselves together. I mean, the politicians. But I wonder, is that decision to keep the country closed, is it purely a medical decision, or is it a decision which they believe will make the population here, let's say, like them better? So it's really a difficult thing to, I mean, because other countries, they are more or less open. And even though there are border controls and there are quarantine measures and so on, they are so much more open than Japan is at the moment.
I think the thing that he's confronting is he just doesn't want the criticism for having made a bad decision. So being risk averse, the general population is risk averse. They look to the central government to make the decisions to keep them safe and prosperous. The Japanese economy is humming along. The trade numbers are looking not bad at all. Export are showing signs. The inflation rate is maintaining steady. So even in spite of COVID, things seem to be humming along, even though there is a work from home and there is some work stoppages due to supply chain issues. But the economy seems to be doing pretty well. So I think it's not just, I think both your provided answers to the question, is it a medical reason or is it just to keep the population liking the administration for making these kinds of decisions? I think it's a combination of the two. As long as they have a reasonable basis for making this decision of keeping the borders locked, and most Japanese people don't care about the foreigners coming in, the tourists coming in. It's great if you're living in many areas of Japan. Kyoto is suffering because of the lack of tourists going in, but it's kind of a nice place to visit these days. But I think it's also the fear of making a decision that turned out to be the wrong one. So, for example, this issue with the U.S. Forces coming in, bringing the variant with them. Wow, that is such bad news for the U.S.-Japan relationship, and there's a lot of discussions going on about how the United States forces can implement quickly different protocols. And the problem there is that, the United States military, it's a huge organization, and it's not just a single entity. It's the Army, it's the Navy, it's the Air Force, it's the Marines, and they all have their own policies and their own protocols. So I think that the United States is good at trying to mend the relationship, but not so good at implementing the procedures that are based on the discussions. So we always criticize the Japanese for being slow to implement. I think in some instances, the United States, they talk a big talk, but the implementation just never reaches the expectation of their Japanese hosts. So it is creating a bit of a friction between those two interests.
Well, that's yes, an unexpected insight, but
yeah,
quite a few people, also medical doctors overseas, say that the new variant, it could be a blessing in disguise, right? Because it is not as deadly, it's more virulent, but
yeah,
it can provide that much needed immunity
yeah.
for the population. And still, the politicians here, they do not actually view, well, the new variant from this angle.
Yeah. So one of the problems is that all the inoculations from Pfizer. So Pfizer made a killing here in Japan, then Moderna and AstraZeneca, and it turns out that the vaccines that were initially the first shot, and then we decided, oh, you have to have a second shot, and maybe the second shot, if you had a Pfizer, maybe the second shot should be one of the other two, and it turns out that they are not as effective on the Omicron variant, as they were with COVID. So most of the cases that are coming up now, they're all Omicron, but Omicron is not as deadly. So even though, we've had, 30,000 cases just in the last week or so, I can't say only, but Japan has had 18,000 deaths since the pandemic started. So
over 2
yeah,
years, yes.
yeah, it's really interesting how Japan has been able to survive this. And I don't think it's just because of masking, but I think it's because the implementation of the restrictions and also the distribution of the vaccines. But it looks like they really don't want to have the infections even of the variant, and so they're doubling down on the booster shots and also on inoculating children. So that's a pretty big deal. The fact that they've approved a vaccine for children 5 years to 12 years old is pretty big. And in some of the other countries, they have reported some deaths for children on the application. So there's a lot of concern about, maybe we should just focus on those children who have pre-existing conditions that make them more susceptible, and then leave the decision up to the parents on the other children. So I think that's the policy imperative that they're confronting now.
Yeah, we got a question via the back channel. Hiroko sent us a question, and it is: world logistics are paralyzed at the moment due to a rising shortage of manpower.
Yeah.
Then I see empty shelves in the supermarkets in the United States. Do you think that this will happen in Japan?
I don't think it'll happen in Japan, but it is a stark reality of contemporary American life now, and it's being played up because of this division between Republicans and Democrats, and also the policies of the Biden administration. So a lot of people, truckers, people in the lower socioeconomic levels, it's almost a toss-up. Do I go to work and bust my butt and get my salary, or do I stay home and I don't bust my butt? It's a little bit easier and relaxing. I do get money from the government, and maybe that's the better way to play this out. I don't think that is going to happen in Japan. Japan internally has a great structure for just-in-time delivery, and I think it would be difficult to. I just don't think the Japanese population and policymakers would tolerate a reduction in food and vegetables and fresh vegetables to be available. That would be a killer for the Kishida administration.
Right. And Angie.
Hello, guys. Thank you.
Hi, Angie. How are you?
Hi, Maya. Hi, Timothy. I'm good. Well, it's 1 a.m. at night in Germany, and I'm still finishing up my project for university. So, listening to you on the side.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, unfortunately, due to time differences, I'm usually late on listening in and speaking with you, but today it's my lucky day. So, Timothy, I have one question. I am one of those very infuriated students who cannot enter Japan,
Uh-huh.
and I've been following it on the internet and news. I mean, basically every day checking the newspaper. Is there any update? Very depressed about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I start to wonder, due to the rhetorics now happening on the internet. Also, for example, WHO has voiced their concerns about Japan closing borders and actually saying that there is no effect of such measures and that they should really reconsider. While Kishida still just stands his point and says, no, we're going to stay closed. I start to wonder how big is the power position of Japan to be ignoring outside pressure like that, because it does come across like xenophobic a lot, and people
Mm-hmm.
have been even on LinkedIn, mentioning some very ancient ways of Japanese behavior that are being repeated. And yeah, I start, I don't know, to wonder what game are they playing and how, like, who are the forces that could swing this lockdown? I mean, at all? Like, is it the companies, the big corporations, or I don't think the education people will have much to say, even if they
Actually,
complain.
no, actually, I think when the restrictions are lifted, it is the students and teachers who will get first bite. I think that the amount of pressure that has come in from various capitals of the world and also various embassies here, chambers of commerce, they have been clamoring. So there are basically three levels. There's the business travelers, and the business travelers who are residents of Japan, maybe their children are coming back to visit, they do have a preferential treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some freer flow there. They still have to go through some sort of uh, period of time in the hotel or checking, their status as a carrier or as infected. And so to keep businesses going and keep businesses from stop complaining. But it's the people who have been assigned to come to Japan. Those are the ones that are being left out. They're like the foreign teachers and students who are earmarked to come to Japan. So the fellows who are here with their family and their dog and they're helping to run companies, they were supposed to be rotated out because their 3-year term is finished. They can't get their replacement in, so sometimes they're extending their stays here. With ambassadors, it's a different issue, and with diplomats as well. They basically come in on a diplomatic pouch, right? So they don't have to adhere to all of the restrictions imposed by immigration and the foreign ministry. So diplomacy is at a different level, but it's not that impactful to the economy. So when the restrictions are released, it will be probably as a blanket applied to foreign teachers and students. They will get a concession immediately. And following that, it would be the business executives and people who are coming to Japan on business travel, not to come here to live, but those who are bringing suitcases to have a 2-week stay or to participate in a trade exposition or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not going to happen until the end of February. That's for sure. We already know that. So moving into March and April, I think you can anticipate something happening probably around April or May. But for people who are, the school starts in April, right? That's when you're supposed to be here. That's
Yep.
when the classes start. So it looks like, definitely not until February. Perhaps there might be some concessions in March. Gosh, that's really tight, isn't it?
That is super tight. Like for me, I would have 10 days to
Yeah.
get a visa and fly. No, I'm already like saying goodbye to that. I mean, it's just not really realistic to keep hoping. Just maybe back to my question, like, is this pressure from outside? Does
Yes.
it not bother even politically anybody in Japan?
No.
Because they must see that the world is judging them, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't carry that much weight. But the levers of power to address that question, who kind of can influence the Japanese government, the foreign ministry, to be more consistent or to adopt more generally accepted norms on how to deal with that. The Japanese are always going to be on the far side of the bell curve. They're very careful, especially with regard to their borders and allowing foreigners to come in. So I think the greatest fulcrums of influence there are various countries' foreign ministries and their ministers of state, and I think everybody has kind of voiced their concern. So it's not something that the Japanese government doesn't know about. And secondly, it is the ambassadors here, because they're representing their countrymen's companies who are here and the difficulties that they have. And so this is probably happening at least on a monthly basis, as the foreign ministry meets with the ambassadors on a regular basis. And then third is the various chambers of commerce, who carry a lot of weight because they actually represent the companies and have some form of a lobbying mechanism to get these issues pushed forward. So I don't know if it was under the leadership of the American Chamber of Commerce, but I know that the American Chamber of Commerce played a central role, provided a letter and recommendation to the foreign ministry about the inability of these students and the foreign teachers to come into the country. And that's pretty impactful. So it hasn't made that much of a difference yet. And I think we were on course to bring the students and the teachers in until Omicron hit. So that was in November, and then it just hit really hard. And then all of a sudden we started to go to a very quick, quasi not lockdown, but emergency area. And so I think it's just a period that we're suffering now. I think as we get into March and April, it will be back to where we were in October. And I think things will lighten up. You'll remember that, well, you won't remember because you're in Germany, but as soon as we hit the fall and COVID's numbers started to go down, Mr. Kishida became prime minister, all of a sudden there was more of a vibrancy, and the economy was opening up. People were out on the streets. It was really, really nice. And then the Omicron variant hit. I think probably March, April, May, we will be back to that stance. That's what I predict. And I think that the government wants to gear it that way because of the elections in July.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you for tuning in.
I will say goodnight to both of you now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Oh, by the way, Maya, the ambassador from the United States has arrived in Japan.
Oh, has he?
Yes.
Wow, when did
that was just I believe it was last week.
Last week, right.
I still wait by my phone waiting for that call. It hasn't come in yet, but I think it was last week.
Yes, they're going to contact you, I'm sure.
Yes, I keep waiting.
Right. And well, you also mentioned that Kishida, he said that Japan and of course his government are going to push for green energy, yes, and obviously work for zero emissions target, the zero emissions target here in Japan and also in Asia. But it also implies that they will need to work on developing renewable energies, because we know that the government has now embraced the fact that Japan will need to rely on nuclear energy for the foreseeable future, because the renewable energies like wind power and solar power, they are not developed to the point where they can sustain the economy here. So are there any policies, or is there any talk about this yet? Or are we going to hear about these policies after the elections?
No, I think before that. So there is a lot going on in that area. One of the things that's somewhat alarming, well, there are a couple of things, but one of them is that the cost for renewable now is beginning to suffer from inflation. So the battery prices are beginning to increase, the construction of batteries. The turbines, the building of the turbines, especially the blades, the price increases there. And some of the solar panels, the price increases there have been like 50%. A lot of those are from China. I don't know if Japan actually has production capability of solar panels. I think most of that is offshored. But that's the first issue, is that, the reason why people are going to develop renewable energy sources is because the Japanese government is going to give them a guaranteed rate for how much electricity they produce. So if the cost of the infrastructure and what they build out produces, whatever, let's say 100, and the Japanese government has promised to purchase that, and they give you a price for that, and that exceeds the cost that you invested in building that infrastructure, and maybe over a 10-year period, according to those rates, you're going to make a 15 or 20% profit margin. Now with the cost of input going up, those calculations get skewed, and then people say, I don't want to invest there, I'll invest someplace else because the money's not so good. They had a granting of licenses maybe 3 weeks ago, and the licenses were just gobbled up by large Japanese conglomerates like Mitsubishi and Mitsui. And so that they will farm out those projects to foreign competitors who will have a competitive advantage in some of these renewable technologies. But the cost that was gained in granting these licenses kind of pushed the other competitors out. They can't compete at that level. Mitsubishi and Mitsui took the lion's share of that. So there's that problem. The other problem is that it turns out that the policymakers were a little bit too aggressive in initiating solar and wind power into the grid. And now they're caught because it's not producing the right amount of energy, and thus the reliance more on nuclear, the existing nuclear power plants. So one of the things that I think as a policy you can anticipate are development of smaller nuclear reactors. They can't get away from nuclear. They just can't fill in that zone quick enough to meet the 2040 deadline. So there are a couple of complications that are going on there, but it is moving. People are still investing in the renewable energy, and Japan has already made a commitment to 2040. So we are moving down that path.
Yeah. Gabor, good morning.
Gabor has a bird.
Yeah.
Is that a parakeet?
Yeah. You see
How
me?
about that?
Or just here?
Gabor, could you please
Pardon me?
speak a little bit louder?
Can you see me or just hear the birds?
I can just hear the birds. Unfortunately,
Okay.
I can't see them.
Yeah, I have birds around. So you hear me, okay? Because it's my first time to speak on Clubhouse, so I don't know. I'm not experienced in this application. I'm speaking from Tokyo. I'm a diplomat, and I have two questions. One is
Sure.
connecting to what Angie said, that on policy, and especially foreign policy, there's a growing gap between what Japan is speaking and what Japan is doing. The country has been closed for 2 years now, and just foreign students, foreign business, so nobody can come in, no new arrivals, but they're still speaking about free and open Indo-Pacific and such
Yep.
things. So, okay. So how long can they maintain that gap between the acts and the talk and the words when speaking about free and open Indo-Pacific?
Forever and ever.
Well, it's it's not really free and not really, especially not open. And well, we saw there's been a growing pressure, discontent, demonstrations around Japanese embassies around the world. And the other thing is the Omicron policy. When Omicron appeared, Kishida was very happy with himself. He was very content and proud that he made a quick decision, closed the borders immediately.
Yep.
I think he learned the lesson of Suga and Abe. They were punished for not being quick and try to balance. But in just 2 weeks, this policy just spectacularly collapsed. I mean, just Omicron is rampant here. Despite it's not really deadly, but still the media is all about Omicron. So this blaming the foreigners, especially the U.S. troops, isn't just a way to disguise the failure of the policy. I'm sure Kishida cannot say that I made a decision and I was wrong and it didn't work. So you need to find an excuse.
Yeah, I think to get to your first question, which was how long can they do this? They do this all the time, but they don't have a lock on that market. Other countries do the same thing. It's a regular. It's not a tactic. It's just a way of communication. That they say something and it's beautiful and it sounds great at Davos and it sounds great to the president of the United States. But it's the rollout is a little bit different. But I think reading in between the lines, you can see intentions, and I think the Japanese are not known for being devious or deceitful. I think it's just a matter of addressing the audience in the way the audience hopes to be addressed and to receive the news that they hope to receive, and just accommodating to the degree that they can while doing exactly what they want to do in the background. Maya, you apparently you wanted to say something about that?
Definitely, a free Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific and a closed Japan are two different things. And well, probably we're talking about geopolitics and politics, which indeed overlap to a certain extent, but they're still two different
Yeah.
fields. And yeah, just as you said, Timothy, Japan has been very good at maintaining their way of doing things, despite of what they say and what happens throughout the world. So probably we are not going to see that opening as you the opening which you're talking about, Gabor, this
Yeah,
month. Maybe not in February either.
it's many parts of Japanese society, and especially the countryside, they just see that the country has been closed for 2 years and things are working. Trains are going on time, restaurants are open, schools are open, stores are fully operational.
Yeah.
So we can live with that. So it's very, I assume it's a very tiny part of society and business and
Yeah,
higher
that
education who are
that's
really feeling the negative effects of this
yeah.
policy.
Yeah,
And
I was going to say that actually. We can't be too myopic. The impact of the foreign community here and also internationally, Japan's role and Japan's place in it plays a very minor role. I mean, mostly it's domestic. Politics are domestic, but it is a country whose economy depends on international trade and being a member. Like I said, the G7 leadership turns to Japan next year. So it is a player there. It needs to be accepted as a leader. Mr. Kishida said he wanted to be a leader in green technology and as a kind of a bastion, a lighthouse for digitization of the economy. But did you know that South Korea and maybe even Taiwan will exceed Japan in GDP in 2028, 2029, somewhere around there. Japan is the third largest economy right now. It is looking like it will be surpassed within the next 7 years or so.
per capita?
Pardon me?
Per
GDP
capita.
per
Yes.
capita.
Yeah,
Yes.
per capita. Well, and it's also what you said. I can see 2 points, if you allow me to break this down. So indeed, in the short term, there are benefits for keeping the country closed because, Kishida is not going to get any criticism, for
Yeah.
letting foreigners in, and potentially a lot of people believe that if the borders get open, so the spread of not only Omicron, maybe other variants will probably speed up. So, but I can see the short-term benefit, but at the same time, we cannot ignore that the fact that the long-term disadvantages are there, and Japan has been suffering from shortage of talent. So, one of the things the country has wanted to do is to allow foreign workers to
Right.
come to Japan, and they haven't done this for 2 years, which has put a lot of companies here in a very dire situation. So, and as Angie mentioned earlier, so there is a growing perception of Japan as, I don't like the expression, but let's say xenophobic
Yeah.
country overseas, which in the long term will have definitely detrimental effects on the economy, probably on other sides of the country's, let's say, diplomacy too. So there are a lot of issues indeed. And Gabor, as you said, yeah, they need to be resolved, but the question is when and how they will be.
Yeah. Well, in that context, the Diet was going to consider the revision of the law for detainees who have been arrested for overstaying their visa, and the girl from Sri Lanka who died in the cell created a huge controversy. And then you've got this horrible video of the Vietnamese agricultural worker being beat, by his colleagues or the people who have hired him, and that hit the press pretty hard too. So there is, like you said, they need to have the foreign workers and they need to have the policies to accommodate them. But boy, sometimes the messages that are being sent out, not through official voices, but just how things are actually done here, really is not accommodating for what Japan actually needs to do if it wants to maintain a high profile. Did that address your issue, Gabor?
Oh yes, more than that. More than that.
Okay.
I just like to want to add one thing. Maya mentioned the long-term negative effects of these policies, but I was thinking, who cares about long-term when you have to face an election in July?
That's right. Yeah, everything, it's like a doorstop. The election in July is like, everything is geared to that. Nobody's thinking anything beyond that, even though we've got the carbon footprint, we've got,
Yes.
Nuclear energy, we've got all of these other things, and revision of the Constitution. Everything kind of dead ends at the elections, and I think that is what is.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Gabor.
Thank you.
Well, we've got a new visitor.
Hello, Maya.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me to up.
Sure.
I was listening, but as well, I'm wondering lots of things about the Web3, crypto, and NFTs. So, what I'm wondering right now, what I'm saying, especially in the Asia, in the Philippines and other places, lots of people leaving their jobs, and maybe because of there's not that much job opportunities on these places, but they are leaving their job and they started playing earn games, which is actually working on the blockchain technology. So I'm wondering also what's going on in Japan, because I know Japan has lots of metaverse platforms as well. There's huge community on there. Also, well, it's happening, of course, in Turkey too. After the COVID-19, actually society, they don't want to come back to their offices. So is there any new approach for the new business organizations, let me say, like we call DAOs and other things, but they are from the Web3. But I'm wondering what kind of approach going on there in the society.
That's a great question. I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said. You talked about a lot of issues, but I think overall, if the Japanese are going to really embrace digitization, then it does include a crypto component, and the Japanese are somewhat familiar and flexible with that. I mean, a lot of it used to be that the Japanese were married to cash transactions, and even businessmen going out would be carrying several $100s worth of yen just on their body, cash. And people buy cars and they buy real estate, they buy houses with cash, and that is changing rapidly. And the great thing about this country and this culture is that the Japanese do accept new things rather easily. And as a test ground, it's a great place. I mean, even Bitcoin was launched here, but I think that the Japanese are very cautious about new technologies, and unfortunately, they have to ramp up so much more quickly than they normally do if they're going to make any inroads. And when you do that, you do tend to make mistakes. You get things wrong. Even crypto, it was launched. Bitcoin was launched here, and then they ran into a scandal, and much of the transactions were lost, and somebody stole the money, and just a huge mess there. So I think the Japanese government prefers to accept and embody these kinds of technologies when they own it, when they can control and manage it. And if they can't, then maybe it needs to be with one of the bigger houses, the trading firms, because they can manage that. And if something happens, they can blame them. But I think just bringing in that amount of technology from people who have that competitive advantage coming into Japan, it just doesn't quite work that way. It needs to have several years of proof of concept and the rollout of how that works. For example, the kick what are they called? The kickboards, or the vehicles on the road that you see sometimes, electric skateboards like that. They had a tough time coming in. They let some of them come in. It was really cool. It began to take off, and then they ran into problems with it, and they had to tighten up the regulations. So I think as a pattern, we see that all the time. But you're absolutely right that Japan needs to really ramp up. They need to change how they do that. And I think while the prime minister has said that that's what he wants to do, he wants to ramp it up. He wants to engage very quickly. I think the society and the cultural norms here don't quite allow it. And that's for 100,000 different reasons. For most of the people on this room who have lived in Japan for many years already understand.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Also, I'm wondering, well, how expand all those hardwares on there, like the VR glasses and the AR glasses? Is it a huge market on there or not? Of course, it's also about the metaverse platforms. I'm asking that because as well, we have issue actually all around the world. how we will expand that technology, but it's going to be with the hardwares. So do you have any insight about that?
No, I'm sorry, I don't. And I only watched Spider-Man this week, so I'm only becoming
Okay.
somewhat familiar with the metaverse or the multiverse. Begum, you're in Japan. You're living in Tokyo.
I'm in Turkey, Timothy.
Okay.
Well, right now what I'm doing, I'm running for actually it's kind of like startup, but it is something new. And to do that also, I'm trying to understand all those different countries, what is their law regulations, to open my company also wisely, and what is actually a chance to expand that technology all around the world, not only for the metaverse, but the metaverse is actually something we
Yep.
can educate people, and it
Yep.
is also too helpful for the medical care and all other things.
Absolutely.
And it is revolutionary.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I asked all those questions. I'm trying to understand, and I'm comparing all these different cultures as well.
Yeah, I think it has great potential value, but I think other countries will launch it and develop it and be really good at it, and then the Japanese will observe and take pieces of it and embody certain aspects of it. But I think, yeah, ultimately, as you said, working from home, this is a way to do that effectively. Also, purchasing and reducing the carbon footprint. You're absolutely right. I think with the glasses and the device that you wear so that you can interact with the metaverse is only going to become really important and critical if Sony can grab it, and be a manufacturer of the hardware or produce the software for it, and that's when it will be interesting for them. But I think probably the smaller companies have a better technical advantage there because they're developing it and they have a market for it. The market here is, I think, only just beginning to grow.
A little bit more leads there. Well, and Navin, good morning.
What I'd like to say is basically the whole, the idea of the metaverse and everything, it just feels unreal at this point in time because Facebook just changed its name to Meta, and all of a sudden we have to go all gaga or metaverse. Doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I'll probably wait until Hideo Kojima-sama tell this, what is how things should be or something. And that's all I have to say about that. And my question basically about Japanese politics. It's just a general question as if foreigners want to visit Japan at this kind of time, uh, pandemic and all that, what are the requirements? And is tourism still an option
They
right now?
can't. No, they can't.
Oh,
This is
oh,
more in Maya's field of expertise, but no, basically the borders are closed. No tourists coming in. In fact, they announced or they reported just this last week, not to anyone's surprise, that the number of foreigners visiting Japan was at the record low last year. Surprise, surprise.
Yes,
Maya?
there were just about 246,000 foreigners who came
wow.
to Japan,
Okay.
and they were not tourists. They were people who were traveling to visit families, also business travelers. So no.
I have a friend who is visiting Japan now. He and his wife, we went to law school together, and he came in under a special hardship allowance because his father has a heart condition. So he was born in Japan. He's an Indian, born in Japan, and his family has been in Japan. His father came in as an immigrant, so he has some sort of. It's like the Japanese would allow foreign workers to come in, and initially when they came with that policy, they allowed lots of Brazilians because there's a lot of Japanese blood there. So I think similarly with my friend, since he lived here and since his parents are living here and his hardship is because his father is suffering, they were able to come in, and it looks kind of like a tourist, but it's not. It's supposed to be just hardship. You're supposed to visit your parents, take care of their needs, and things like that. So they're in quarantine right now, and the quarantine restrictions are pretty tough. I think it was 8 days, and it might have been reduced to 5, and then another 7 days or so at home under restrictions and people calling you up. So it is very tough. Even I think for tourists, it's just out of the question. Isn't that right, Maya?
It is right.
Is it possible, let's say that the tourism thing might open up, and
Doors
if they open up,
wide open.
the tourist, not the doors wide open thing, just basically the people to come in and visit Japan and have fun and all that. Basically the pre-pandemic
Yeah, I think
atmosphere.
that's a great question. I think that's right up Maya's alley. I suspect that it'll be doors wide open, maybe towards the late spring or summer. But Maya, what's your view?
Well, from the information we have at the moment, first they're going to restart the GoTo campaign in the beginning of April. It was planned to restart, in the beginning of February. The launch has been postponed by 2 months, and that GoTo campaign is going to be entirely domestic. Well, the country, when it gets open to foreign visitors, tourists, the opening will not be a blanket opening at that point. It will go just on the basis of bilateral agreements in the beginning. And so the major source markets of Japan as a travel destination will be probably the first to open corridors between them and Japan for tourists. I'm not talking about business travelers, so it's a totally different topic. So I have no timeline about that. People already stopped talking about when it might happen, but it will be definitely something which happens after the GoTo campaign starts, after they see how it goes, and if there are no other new variants of COVID. So
Yeah, fingers crossed, I guess.
yes, fingers crossed, indeed. So it's really
But
difficult to say what happens here in Japan in the next 3 or 4 months. But yes, Timothy, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
but would there be vaccine requirements for the people who want to come into Japan, or
Yes,
is it just
that's expected to be one of the requirements.
One of the other things is that based on the countries from where the tourist is coming from, they will have a calibration of how many, or if they even can come, based on that country's COVID response. So it's almost like a quota. If you have people coming in from South Africa, maybe the South Africa quota of tourists might be limited to 500 a month or a week or something like that, based on what their COVID footprint looks like, and that will be applied across the board through other countries. And some countries just won't be allowed to send their tourists in. Isn't that pretty accurate, Maya?
Yes, it is at the moment, but of course,
and also like certain countries don't have the let's say in India we don't have the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine as of yet, but then
Right.
with the AstraZeneca vaccine, or let's say the other vaccine, the Covaxin, would that be considered as requirements in the
Yeah.
sense to show as a
Who knows? But I think that's all going under the calculation, and that's being feverishly handled, at immigration under the guidance of the foreign ministry. So it does take a lot of work how to implement that. So yeah, it takes, how are they going to roll that out? I think it's just going to be a bit of a trickle, a bit of experimentation before it goes into something of a more full board. But I think the economy is looking forward to that, getting back on track and allowing the foreigners to come in. And I predict that when that happens, it's just going to be like the Roaring Twenties in Japan again.
that's awesome. There's one final thing I had to say is like I read some article, I don't know if it's true or not. It's like some time ago, Japanese government, they said that the vaccine is like let's say it's up to you whether you want to take it. For the citizens, and and we're not going to discriminate you on your choice, something like that. I think that's like a really progressive thing the government has done. I just want to like put praise to it. But if I'm wrong, then maybe you guys can correct me.
No, you're right, and it's a great conversation piece. Please weigh in after I finish. I think when you have a country and a culture like Japan where the governor says, "Boy, I wish people would stay home," and everybody stays home, it doesn't require a mandate. And even if you're walking along the streets and you're not wearing a mask, people, the social pressure for you to accommodate is so huge here. So I think Japan has a unique power to uh, initiate these things that don't require a mandate. But it's one of the beautiful things about this country, but also one of the frustrating things. But yeah, I think that the passport is probably coming. That you already can get a vaccine passport now through the ward office. When they go to campaign starts, they might be requiring vaccine passports when you first get into that, but who knows? Maya?
yes, they will be requiring vaccine passports, but at the same time, there will be an option for people who are not vaccinated. The difference will be the number of quarantine days you have to go through once here on Japanese soil. Once again, it might change in the future because you have seen how things change day by day when it comes down to issues related to the pandemic and the new variants, travel, and so on. This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you!